So it's got some of my background kind of history as it relates to outdoor education, and diploma for outdoor adventure education at Fleming College at the Forest campus, my woofer or my wilderness first responder, basic canoe instructor, basic canoeing and all those other fun things, and certified hike leader. Some of those are or any outdoor educator is more than their certifications, but your certifications actually helps to give a bit of an overview of what your specialities are and what you like to focus on. Um, Moving on. So this is where I'm from. And this little tiny little speck out in the middle of the ocean. And as I wrote down, I'm going to read what I wrote. Otherwise, what was the point of me writing it? This is where I'm from, this little island of Bermuda. And the image that you see is from a single airplane window. So the country is actually very, very small. And most of what I'm looking at is ocean. I was born in 1964, and my first experience with Outward Bound was in 1976, back in Bermuda, way down the eastern end of the island, way down here. Yeah, right over that way. I came to Canada in 1981 as an Army cadet, and that was the first time I had seen green as far as the eye could see instead of blue, as you see in the image. I moved to Canada in 2003, went to Fleming College's Outdoor Adventure Education program in 2017, graduated in 2019, and have been working in the industry ever since. And I'll add in that one of the things that really touched me even before I enrolled in college was I was very interested in self-awareness in the outdoors. My practice that I'll be actually sharing, or my philosophical perspective that I'll be sharing, is something that I had been practicing from, I'd say, the mid 1980s. And it had, it's been a positive influence in my life. And as I got into doing more formal outdoor education, I thought of ways of how to merge what I had already been doing, which has a strong environmental, cosmological root and system and principles, to what I was learning new from Indigenous community and just by living in Canada as a whole. And one of the last things I have here, the last paragraph, is like, as you can imagine, I had to adapt to a completely new environment, new flora, fauna, and weather, and the seasons. It has been an experience of extended growth and development over time. It caused me some challenges when I was first in college, when we were doing what they call ecosystems, learn about flora and fauna and have to do tests on it. But if this was the basis of where you come from in the ocean, it doesn't look like anything around here. So I had to learn and adapt. And some of the things that I wanted you to have a gist of where I was from, and how much of a change it is to being in this environment. Hope is my little disclaimer. Note, what follows is a snapshot of my personal way of interacting with nature, both within and without. It is presented not as a doctrine for others to adopt, but to share my perspective and to inspire others to form their own cosmological and existential philosophy. May it be taken in the spirit it was given. So, some of the things that I am really moved by are the Taoist philosophy, and you'll see that factored in quite a bit in here. I do also and have practiced Buddhism over the decades as well, and both of them are very core to my being. But within this context, I'll be focusing more on the aspects as it goes towards Taoist philosophy, yin and yang, the five elements, the Bagua or its eight trigrams and forces of nature and that kind of mode. So the first thing that I really wanted to share is about the fundamental, I hold a fundamental oneness of things. And you'll see it at the top on this slide. Uh, Normally, that oneness, that intelligent or the intelligent ground of the universe is usually described as Wuji, and in Buddhism, it's called the Dharmakaya, or the root of reality. And the division, or the first differentiation and then the separation into opposites, Tai Yin, Tai Yang, or uh, what I call the bright and the clear, or people will have a tendency of just referring to them as yin and yang within a Tai Chi symbol that you see. And then it goes on to the five elements. And then what was called Wan Wu, or the 10,000 things, or basically a way of saying the diversity of life as we see it within our daily lives. There's bugs, there's snakes, there's birds, and everything else. So the fundamental oneness of things I find is in both an internal and an external principle. And I have that as the root of my perspective. And then to brighten it clear, it's a bit of a shame because this is actually making it so that I can't really see my notes. But I think I remember it enough. So to brighten it clear, there's the yin and yang symbol, or basically the Tai Chi symbol at the top with yang and yin. Hi, Beatrice. Glad you're here. There's yin and yang, but I also refer to those as the bright and the clear because of things that I learned from the ocean from growing up in Bermuda. And the same type of dynamic operates within snow as well. So for the dynamic of the bright and the clear is the same way as you have clear water that creates white foam. And the white foam isn't because the ocean, the water, became anything other than clear. It became a series of bubbles that refract light and create an image of whiteness. Its fundamental nature is inherently clear and it doesn't change from that. Much in the same way as if you were to pick up a snowflake, it is absolutely clear, but all on the ground as they refract light, it gives the appearance of white snow. And that amalgam between the bright and the clear is really what or the metaphor that I'm trying to get across in this. And it also pertains to fullness and emptiness in things and the natural cycles of things becoming either full and empty. And whether it's the day, it can be looked at in terms of day or night. And there's other metaphors that can be used for that. Also, I like to apply it within weather as well. So low and high pressure systems, for those of you who weren't aware of this, low pressure systems in the northern hemisphere of the planet revolve counterclockwise. High pressure systems rotate in a clockwise direction. Both of them feed off each other and mutually interact as they actually move across the planet's surface. And I find that both of these atmospheric systems lend to the same type of metaphor in terms of emptiness and fullness and the bright and the clear, or yin and yang. that I had been mentioning in the previous slides. And then we're up to the three. So I'm going numerically from the one as the wholeness of things and the ever-present oneness of all things, to the two things of the bright and the clear, yin and yang, Tai Chi. And now we're at this third part. And the three, the ancient Chinese called these the three powers or the three realms. At that point in time, in the older nomenclature or the way that they had designated it, time and weather was seen as heaven or the sky, and then there was the earth and the ground, and then human beings between these two major forces. Within the outdoor education world, these three are pretty critical. This dynamic as a whole is pretty critical for constant situational awareness and for outdoor leadership. And how you deal with a group of people is definitely dependent upon the time, the weather, where you are on the ground, and what you as a group of people or individually would like to actually accomplish. And is it possible in the two conditions that you're always playing poise and equipoise, trying to find some form of balance? This is another image. This was written in Japanese in the center of it. So this one representing, and this is from Aikido, but I thought that it was a very good image that highlighted that principle written in a different way. So here is what they would call heaven, as I've described it as time and weather. And then at the bottom here is earth, and then humanity in the center, which has aspects of both yang and yin within our bodies, humanity itself. Now we're up to the four, and I'm going to, this one in the center represents the earth, but for the purpose of that, I would like to focus on these four as they go around, because this represents either the cycles of a day or the cycles of the seasons over the course of a year. And here down in the beginning of winter, and then up here in the red is summer, winter, summer, spring, and fall. There's a natural progression that goes from winter into spring, into summer, would go to earth, and then goes to metal. In the context, you'll see these times here because they're, and I'm not going to focus on those. I just actually really like the image, and I've used it in some of the sheets that I've actually kept, because it's representative of many things that I'll actually be doing and I'll continue to go through. So in the course of a day, this would be midnight, dawn, noon, and sunset. So these images are metaphoric ways of actually breaking down the beginning or the cycles that were in the large and small cycles. I'll put it that way, whether it's a day, a lunar cycle, a year. I think everybody can actually kind of follow along with that. These same five elements that you saw in the same five circles are also then put into this arrangement to actually show how they interact with each other, both positively and negatively. So we start here at water. Water, if you the water part of the cycle represents the bottom, like represents winter. And then wood and things actually budding out of the ground represents spring. Fire represents the energy of summer. And at a certain point in time, there's a point where things start to settle. Like even on a hot day, there's a point in time in the afternoon before probably like mid-afternoon when the day starts to settle down. And that's a good metaphor for things of that energy of that high noon sunlight settling down to earth-based energy. And then there's the end of the day that goes into the phase of metal. This is the same system, and both of these systems are the fundamental systems within Chinese medicine. You'll notice there, even though I'm not focusing on it, there's these little symbols down here which actually pertain to the different major meridian systems in the body. And so much of Chinese medicine is actually based exactly on this same system of seeing or arranging uh, what people see around them. The way that I use these five in a more practical sense, coming down from a more philosophical and etherical kind of view of it, is that I see things that I learned through Dave Canterbury's 5 C's of survivability, and I correlated those things with the 5 elements of Wuxing. Because what I noticed was uh, containers are things that hold liquids. Cordage or vines represent wood and the wind. Combustion represents fire. Cover or shelter is like the safety of home, of earth, of being surrounded by brick. Well, that's our normal kind of houses, but a den, a safe place where the elements, whereas the heat of the day uh, or rain or snow, you're sheltered from that. And the best shelter is ones that are made out of stone for the most part, even though in our outdoor setting, that might be a tarp, it might be a tent or something else like that. But there is still a feeling or correlation between our sense of home and going to ground and being safe in the ground. So I have cover as an aspect of earth. And then cutting tools and metal. So what I found was that the way that Dave explained these 5 elements, uh, he kind of showed also these are base skills to actually learn. If people are interested in going into the outdoors, you have to know how to use cutting tools safely. You definitely need to know how to use fire and make positive use of fire. It helps if you can set up a shelter for yourself for thermal regulation and etc. And having a container, and especially here in Ontario, with so many lakes and rivers and water systems, it means that especially with for instance, the most ideal being a stainless steel water container, like a Nalgene, where if you needed to and had no other water purification tabs or filtration system to make it so that you could have drinkable water, you could use a stainless steel container to boil water in order to make water that's safe to drink. And cordage represents vines. Uh, and for me, I also will include wood within that, and being able to use wood effectively to craft items or to to make your experience in the outside better, right? Uh, and over on the other side, I have, let me just shift over my little image. And this is something else that I learned in college when I was doing Indigenous perspectives and the Indigenous knowledge at Fleming College. And one of my teachers, who we would talk quite a bit, both in class and on the bus rides to and from Lindsay to Peterborough and back. And this was a critical thing, and it was axiomatic when I heard it. And this is an Anishinaabe word, Akinomooshin. And as I understood it from the person who taught it to me, it means to learn by interacting with the land. Another term for that would be experiential education, but I particularly liked Akinomooshin because it goes far beyond the leave no trace principles that are normally taught within an outdoor education environment. And it includes you in it. So you're not just doing bushcraft per se and actually taking from the land because you feel that you are in domination of it, but learning by interacting with it. And I find that perspective it's a lot more humble, and speaks to how I believe that people should actually walk on the earth rather than, if anyone's ever seen a dog go through a vegetable garden and a cat go through a vegetable garden. A dog just runs through a vegetable garden and will step on through and just barge through things. And a cat has a tendency of actually using the empty spaces between the plants, and it barely leaves any trace of its passing. The ocean actually taught me that as well. When I would go, and I enjoy kayaking, and that's a pretty big place to go kayaking. Um, but when you go out on the ocean, if you think that you're in charge of it, you're about to have a really bad experience. I found that it was a lot better to be respectful of the ocean and aware and be aware of my smallness as a human being. Like I'm literally Cindy Lou Who in Whoville, like I'm in comparison to the ocean or in comparison to Algonquin Park. Uh, I'm very, very small. Um, so to have some kind of false bravado as I interact with the environment, I think is foolhardy at best, pretty dangerous, you know. So before I move on from this slide, the way that I practice Akinomooshin is I spend a lot of time outside when I go to work, even if we're going to be in a base, and I can use the base to use the staff quarters, stuff like that. I still use the bathrooms and put my food in the kitchen and whatever else and interact with my peers. But for the most part, I enjoy being outside in the natural environment because then I get a chance to practice my Akinomooshin using these five elements and these other dynamics in a firsthand way. I'm not just hoping I get an opportunity to share it with somebody and that my skills haven't become rusty. I used them last night, irrespective of what the weather was, and I'll use them today to teach a class. And after the class is over, then I go back to using those things. And I enjoy doing that. And I find that my awareness of Akinomooshin is is cultivated by that simple practice of taking every opportunity to be outside, interact with the natural environment, and learn little small things as time goes on. And now the six. Six, the sixes are pretty interesting. I see the sixes in the sixes. I see the most effective way to use a circle. Its radius and sides are the same length. B's are definitely got it down. Um, and thus the six lines that compose the hexagrams of the I Ching. So there's the yin and yang that I was speaking about earlier in this cosmological view of things eventually gets to a point of the sixes. And because the center and the sides, the radius and the sides in a hexagram are exactly the same. And I find that's a good metaphor for the inner eye to the outer, to our actual sensory awareness. There's not much difference between the two, even if things might appear that way. This right here is a I Ching hexagram, which I find is another representation of this hexagonal, of the hexagonal shape. Some of you might be actually wondering, this is the seventh. So what we call a week is literally three. Let me back up a little bit. Each degree of the sun's angular motion in the sky is like each 3 days, there's 1 degree of movement of the sun's angular movement in the sky. So at the beginning of winter, the sun is really low on the horizon, and then every 3 days it goes up by one. So at a certain point in time, in the when summer begins, the sun will be at its highest point. The reason that I mentioned the 3 days equaling 1 degree of the sun's angular movement in the sky is because a week is 2 degrees of the sun's angular movement in the sky and the beginning of the next cycle. And that is why we have a 7-day week. Within the I Ching itself, sorry, this principle is actually used as a principle of renewal, revival, um, both within the individual subjectively and in the natural environment. And the 8 forces of nature. These are the trigrams of the I Ching, and with them and through my practice of the I Ching over the past 30-some odd years, it's helped me to have a better intuitive understanding of myself, and also giving me insight into external situations, and also incorporated within it are a lot of principles of nature. I'm going to start from the bottom and just from here, and then I'll go around and give a very brief definition of each one of the trigrams. Notice that the trigrams are viewed not from the outside, but from the center of the circle. So the center is the perspective, and then it goes out like that. Right? So here at the bottom is water, and that symbol represents flowing water between two banks of a river. This is mountain. Water has a tendency of water engulfs anything that touches it and actually draws it into itself. This is mountain, read from the center, and mountain says stop, and also pertains to, it's a part of earth, but it also says stop and brings things to the end of a cycle. Here is thunder, and it looks the opposite of that. One says stop, one says go. And thunder, we're getting thunder and lightning over the yesterday and today in the southern part of Ontario, because spring is sprung, and the lightning is one of the things that actually starts up the nitrogen cycle in the soil. And this time of the year, it should be sugar bush season for people collecting maple syrup. In old Chinese, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this part right here represents the beginning of spring, and in particular, a special date, which is called the Day of Waking Insects. And the Day of Waking Insects is when those first bits of lightning start to show up, the nitrogen cycle starts to go in the soil, and almost like one of those crash carts when they're defibrillating somebody. That's pretty much what nature, what lightning does to areas of the ground after its sleep in winter. It gives it a good shock. Trees are back up, bugs are flying around, and pretty soon it'll be mosquito season again. Here is wood, and wood representing uh, branches, trees, also the wind. We can't see the wind, but we see evidence, we see the effects of wind rather than the wind itself. And one of the things that always shows us how the wind is moving is wood or trees. And we see evidence of what it's actually doing. Here's fire, representing the sun, and the sun and fire in itself, brightness and awareness. This trigram represents earth, and its broad, flat, welcoming, and yielding nature. It bears all and supports all. This one here is marsh or lake, and pertains to the first phase of metal. And this first phase of metal can also be seen in ancient times. That this trigram was used to represent rice paddies, and large fields of, like, sometimes flooded fields or rice paddies that provided a source of nourishment for the people, and hence joy, and pertains to concentrates and things that we concentrate down. Um, and this one right here is represents Chien or heaven. But for the most part, in a practical sense, this is strong yang energy and usually represented by a dragon. And these are the 8, and they intermix with each other to form 64 hexagrams that then become the basis of one of the oldest books that is still actively used, called the Yijing. Most people are familiar with this. The South Korean flag is heaven, earth, the sun, and the moon. And those are the 4 parts on the South Korean flag, and represent the core 4 energies that is within this system. Yeah, these ones. So South Korea's flag is basically these 3 lines, these 3 lines, these 3, and these 3. Um, these are within the I Ching. These are then the 4 principal points of the hexagrams within it. Part of the reason that I'm going through all of this part of the I Ching first is because I have a cosmological, where I'm sharing my cosmological perspective of how things go from a point of unity to showing the diversity of things. And in a little bit, I'll be delving more into the more practical systems. These are further ones. This is from one of my books, which actually shows the 8 phases of yin and yang as it ebbs and falls or rises and falls, like the moving of the tides. And this is one of my own drawings and diagrams that I did up for myself years ago, which shows from the single point of singularity, there's the first division, and then yang and yin energy, and then these become the 4 phases, and then these, the representation within this ring, these represent the realm of thought, and then the ones on the outside represent the sensory world, and together they move and change, um, and based on where you're at and where you need to be. And the I Ching is a tool that actually helps me to actually work that part out. And these are the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. Um, and I don't expect everybody to remember this, but I absolutely have all of this in my all the time. Earth. So from the high-end cosmological and philosophical parts, the Earth systems. The picture that's there is what I call, or what I've learned, it's called a reciprocating roof or reciprocating frame structure. And this is something that I made when I was working at Lakefield College School. And it basically, I wanted to see if you could build an 8-sided structure by taking a simple piece of string less than 6 foot long and build a basis for a structure. And I thought that this picture actually represented the Earth and the stability of the Earth quite well. The same phases that we saw before and the trigrams that we saw before, this is a representation from one of my books that was published by Dr. Stephen Karcher from the Aranos Foundation when he was involved in that over the 50 years. The Aranos Foundation was a foundation in Switzerland where they were tasked with, or one of their research tasks was to do a comprehensive redoing and collection of a lot of ancient texts um, so that they could make a better translation of the I Ching. Um, and this is one of the diagrams that was in his work, and it's been helpful. And I kind of sometimes call this a universal compass. But what it does for me is it shows almost like an almanac, the changing of seasons and how things rise and fall. And those same dynamics are forces in nature that we see as the seasons, but they also operate within us as psychological and emotional states as well. This right here is an agricultural symbol. This is an agricultural calendar from Chinese culture. You'll notice that at the beginning of this, and you can still see the outward bound Canada um, compass rose. And it's important to note that the compass rose that we're most familiar with, which is the basis of the outward bound symbol and logo, is actually derived uh, from the Chinese system and its agricultural calendar. And hence, this was actually then used in some of the earliest compasses, which then became part of the compass rose system. So in this area here is winter, spring, summer, and fall. And this was, so round about here would be the day of waking insects. And then it starts to become spring. And this is spring equinox. This is summer solstice. This is winter. This is the fall equinox, and this is the winter solstice. So with this, they could, and I also will qualify this by each one of these areas changes slightly based upon the lunar cycle, and it's a solar lunar system from antiquity. This one right here is another image that actually has got this in a slightly different way, and it shows how these symbols can be used to represent the hours of a day or energy as it's moving through the body based upon Chinese medicine. And it shows the branches and stems or uh, the nerve network as it goes through our bodies. And so Chinese medicine is a derivative of this system. I like it because, and then for the purposes of what we're talking about today, I find that it's nice to see or have these parts of this almanac highlighted, and then I can make observations based upon the things in the almanac to our modern devices. For instance, this one, and this one gives you'll notice that spring begins. This is what I was referring to basically from the last, when I was talking from the last slide. Spring begins February 4th, 5th. This also is the reason that within Chinese culture, it's called the Spring Festival. It's not really called New Year's. It's called the Spring Festival because um, that's when they've decided that, and through this kind of 5 millennia of experience, this is when they noticed that the beginning of spring actually happens. So you have spring begins, rainwater, the day of waking insects, or the way that it's written here is wake from hibernation. So it has here, that is so annoying. It has here the 5th or 6th of March, but in this particular year, I know that it was on the 26th of February. So based on the lunar cycle in this year, I can amend the rest of these dates and actually see when I notice things. And this is a long-term practice that I've been doing over the past 20 years that I've lived in Canada, where I slowly learn aspects of nature by watching them over very long periods of time. And through that, I've been able to learn and put together these little puzzle pieces to build a more comprehensive view of the natural world and my place in it. And this is my planisphere. I'm kind of glad that the little image came up, but you'll notice that the months of the year go around the ring, and then there's times of the day that you can adjust the dial and then orient it to north and south. And then from that point in time, you can use this as a very low tech way of being able to correlate both the skies over my head with what I'm observing on the ground and learning within myself. So much, that's part of my integrated view of things. This is one of my favorite books, even though on I rely a lot on my own observation. But this book, Nature's Years, Year and the Co-authors, and it's written by the same, it was a slightly, in an earlier edition, I have an earlier edition of this book, and its original title was Nature's Year and the Co-authors, which is the area that I'm currently in. And it's been good to correlate both the star charts what's happening in the natural world around me, my own practice with the I Ching, and what's happening around me within the human context, into one integrated whole, um, and increasing, or the effort of seeing it as a unified system. And now for humanity. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a beautiful thing a beautiful philosophy that I've only been aware of the past few years, but its main principles, one of its core principles is I am because we are. And you can't be a human all by yourself. And when you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just separated from one another, whereas you are connected and what you do affects the whole world. That's from Desmond Tutu. And I am increasingly learning more about Ubuntu as I go along. And a book that was written by his granddaughter, Desmond Tutu's granddaughter, that I want to expand my awareness of it because it highlights so many things. It highlights my core values within interacting with other people and how I wish that I was treated by other people. They also, within Ubuntu, they have a servant leadership model. And even just the title of that actually hit me like a ton of bricks. Um, because within a Western context, we have a tendency of thinking of leadership as I'm in charge and you're under me, or some version of that, where people are either, I don't know, I find that one doesn't, that whole perspective doesn't sit well with me. Um, a leader to me is someone who helps others accomplish what they could not accomplish all on their own. So it's really about the needs of the people that you're serving rather than uh, just oneself. And I wrote about it. For me, an axiomatic teaching confirmed things that I had learned in nonviolent communication some years before. And it's really about increasing my capacity to fulfill the needs of others. Um, and another quote that I took from a paper that was written that is one of my sources: compassion and inspiration result in willful cooperation. And when I do my outdoor education and in whatever context, that statement is a pretty core part of how I interact with people. Within Outward Bounds setup, the mentorship is a follow-on after participants have undergone training, and then usually done a journey, and then they're out uh, and starting to move towards some furtherance of their objectives. I start my mentoring, or my, I don't even want to call it mentoring, my friendship with people, my connection with people from the moment I meet them. And I found that this last statement here, compassion and inspiration result in willful cooperation. And I feel very fortunate that the people that I have greeted and formed rapport with um, want to maintain a connection with me over time, irrespective of whether or not they're involved in outward bound or outdoor education at all. And I think that that's valuable. And Akinomooshin, I'm coming back to Akinomooshin because it was a critical point when I was in college, and it has been, and I was just learning more about the indigenous peoples and and how things have been and how they want to be. In the Canadian context, there is virtually no part of outdoor education that is not Indigenous knowledge, technology, or perspective. Why is this not reflected in our teachings? I practice this by living outside as much as possible, crafting items based upon Indigenous knowledge, both from Canada, the Anishinaabe, Cree, and Inuit primarily, and the indigenous peoples of the boreal forest regions of the earth. And that would be the areas going across the northern part of like the Nordic countries, going across the high belt of Russia and stuff like that. They have almost exactly the same, there's very similar flora and fauna. They have moose, um, they have beavers, they don't use snowshoes, but they use hunter skis. The methods of travel are very similar. Um, the indigenous peoples, the way that the indigenous peoples make their homes and craft things bear great similarities with each other. And that's to me, that becomes representative of how a group of people who is on relatively the same place on Earth within this band around the planet, and the seasons that they contend with actually shapes things, that becomes the basis of their crafts and their culture. Arrive out of the time, place, the weather, the seasons, where they are, how the ground is, and who the people are. Um, Indigenous peoples from the boreal forest regions, the Sami, Altai, and the Taiga of Northern Europe and Russia live with the lamb. I find it really beautiful to see examples of people in these regions doing exactly the same thing as if I had watched a movie called Cree Hunters of Mistanani. I may be mispronouncing the last word wrong, but just going off memory, there are movies made by the Film Board of Canada, and if you see Indigenous people in their summer hunting camps, and then you look across at people in their hunting camps in Russia, you'll see almost exactly the same thing. It's very difficult to actually work out which country it's in, and and based upon the things that the people are doing. The act of crafting gives intuitive insight, or I found that the act of crafting gives intuitive insight into how and why indigenous peoples did what they did. I live in gratitude of their knowledge and technology. Anybody that can make a boat out of a bark of a tree, you got my vote, hands down. And so now another human-based system that I find very influential. And when I came onto Outward Bound, I was very happy that people were very familiar with nonviolent communication. And I'm going to start with the assumptions of nonviolent communication, because these actually struck me quite a bit of the past decade that I've been aware of them. All human beings share the same needs. Our world offers sufficient resources for meeting everyone's basic needs. Actions are attempts to meet needs. Feelings point to needs being met or unmet. All human beings have the capacity for compassion. Human beings enjoy giving. Human beings meet needs through interdependent relationships. Human beings change. Choice is internal. The most direct path to peace is through self-connection. They have other principles of open-hearted living, which involve self-compassion, expressing from the heart, receiving with compassion, prioritizing connection, and in particular, moving away from right and wrong based judgments of things to using a needs-based assessment, living a life of choice, responsibility, and peace, and sharing power and partnership. And this was a particular part, especially for outdoor leadership, and I found was a good message for a couple other things. Caring equally for everyone's needs, and two, using force minimally and to protect rather than to educate, punish, or get what we want without agreement. Within the I Ching hexagram 7, which deals with legions and leading and armies, there's this quote: the ideal of this army is not just to fight, it brings order and protects people who cannot protect themselves. It founds cities and defends what is necessary for people to live their lives. It is not a mistake to use force in this way. Um, in many respects, it's serving through an inner willingness to take risks. Uh, and we make ourselves, because there are physical risks, but there's also emotional and psychological ones as well. But there are things that we undertake as in a leadership capacity to fulfill and see what we can do to benefit other people. There are three modes of application of nonviolent communication. I know we're kind of probably going over time a little bit. And three modes: self-empathy, receiving empathetically, and expressing honest. Most of the dynamics of violent communications is to state what your observation is, and minus the blame and all the rest of it. Say how that observation made you feel. From those feelings, distill down the values and the needs that you need, and then make a request. And I find that this cycle is reminiscent of the energetic and philosophical things that I was talking earlier about, and is probably one of the reasons that it actually jumped, that it was a linkage that actually formed in my mind about that. This is a thing that's connected with, and I won't dwell on this, but this is Scale Development by Max Neef, Neef. And his work is tied together, and he did quite a bit of work with nonviolent communication and Marshall Rosenberg, where this is almost like, and his work is almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but with more segments, and with the things that are important in terms of living nonviolently. What does a person need in terms of subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, leisure, creation, identity, and freedom? And these are positive, for want of a better term, these are positive things that are in terms of being, having, doing, and interacting with other people. On the next one is a negative one, and we can see evidence of that with a variety of things. And this is the papers that I got some time ago. And rather than the positive orientation of things, subsistence then becomes, in terms of being, it becomes meaningless and gluttony. And protection becomes fear and anonymity. Affection is fear of closeness. And I think, in the interest of time, I'm going to continue to move on. And this is something that I do want to spend a bit of time on. And this is the part that I first came in contact with nonviolent communication, and the moralistic judgments moralistic judgments imply wrongness or badness on the part of people who are not, who don't do what, like they're not in harmony with our, don't act in harmony with our values. And the demands are implicit and explicit threats of withdrawal of empathy or threats of aggression if a listener fails to comply, denial of responsibility via language that obscures awareness of personal responsibility, projection in personal forces are conditioned, the actions of others, dictates of authority, peer pressure, rules, regulations, making comparisons between people, the premise of deserving or entitlement. Um, the thing that really, when I first read these, the thing that really struck me is I could easily, from memory, remember when I had experiences with people who had used moralistic judgments against me, demands, denial of responsibility, making comparisons, and a premise of deserving. The thing that really hit me was how many of these things do I do to myself? How many of these things do I say to myself? At the bottom, and I learned this term, psycholinguistics, and it's a bit of a fancy term for describing our internal language and our internal talk, like the things we speak to ourselves in our mother tongue, whatever that is, and are many of the things that we think and how we reason is based upon the words that is part of our internal dialogue. So it became very, very important for me to recognize that if I'm doing these things to myself, and I can clearly see, I can easily give a very good example of politicians that actually use these kinds of negative interactions on a regular basis. And actually, many politicians do this quite a bit. But really, for me, the part that I'm responsible for is how I run my own ship, as it were. And so the self empathy is directly tied to these concepts and actually finding a different way of relating to oneself, and that will change the dynamic of how we are in the world. And the last one, this is, I think this is the last one, and this is another very recent edition called Ikigai. And Ikigai, I have what is your reason? But Ikigai is the Japanese concept meaning what is your reason for being. So um, this was another axiomatic teaching just from the image itself, because it kind of represents the challenge of how to be useful, or for me, it actually represents the challenge of how to be useful, kind, open, and responsive to myself, the people that I love and care about within my circle, and further afield. Um, and yeah, I ask you kind of, and the thing that I wish for everybody who's actually who's been present through this is I really hope that you are able to build a life of meaning, um, where you can serve something higher than yourself and be uplifted and fulfilled through that, because we are because of each other. Thank you very much for spending time with me today.